The fact of the matter is, the majority safe position is regrettably where Democrats love to live, where liberals love to live, in safe consensus and unradical places. And that is exactly the problem. So I'm not surprised by the fact that there wasn't broad consensus for court reform. It is the radical position, just like what Republicans are doing right now is radical. But the radical is always going to beat the status quo compromising to an invisible senator that doesn't really exist. And that's why liberals keep losing. So I don't disagree with you. I'm not surprised to hear that. My critique is that they were wrong in that. And more so than that, political leaders, academics can do what academics want to do. They're not running the country, but political leaders should have had more foresight, especially since we're talking about just a few years ago. A few years ago, Biden had narrowly won. He was the oldest president in history who had to overcome some criticism about his kind of cognitive fitness, even back then during the 2019-2020 race. That was roundly ignored by the press, but these concerns were being raised by people like Julian Castro and others at the time.
They do not have to buy in.
You just said that. You just said that 2 minutes ago. You just said 2 minutes ago that they would have to buy in. You said they would have to buy in.
Have to buy in. If she qualifies for Medicaid,
are you forgetting what you said 2 minutes ago?
Be enforced.
Are you forgetting already what you said just 2 minutes ago? I mean, I can't believe that you said 2 minutes ago that they had to buy in, and now you're saying they don't have to buy. You're forgetting that.
I said anyone.
He even floated the idea that he would be a one-term president. We know the age of the Supreme Court justices. We know the likelihood of people not making it through their terms. And we know that we had this really, uphill battle to reclaim the courts. And that is precisely why we had this conversation last time, right? About court reform and how important it was. And the fact that some people didn't have kind of the political insight or the political courage to be pushing for it is the indictment of the Democratic Party and the indictment of their kind of perspective, their kind of situational worldview, which is to revert to norms and do what Biden just did in that speech, which is to say, I dissent. Oh, gee, great. You're holding a loaded gun and all you're going to say is I dissent.
So that was a long statement. And I have a lot of responses to it. I want to preface it by saying this. Yesterday, I taped 2 mornings ago, I taped a podcast with a very conservative law professor at Catholic University in DC. We disagree on everything. And we had a very pleasant, civil, remarkably, I thought, nice conversation because we were able to disagree strenuously and role model how that works. So I'm about to disagree with you very strenuously.
Please.
I hope we can have that same civil discussion. I think you're wrong in every single thing you just said. And here's why.
Okay.
And this is the conversation I have all the time with Northeastern and Western law professors and politicians and radio shows. I had this conversation once on like the most Berkeley radio station that's, I think, to the left of you. Now, I'm a progressive. I'm a political progressive. I've never voted for Republican in my life in any capacity, in any form. Okay. I was pro-choice at 13. Listen to me. I have spent a lot of time in Alabama. I have spent a lot of time in Georgia. And friends of mine have spent a lot of time in Nebraska and other places in the Midwest. Everything you just said is unrecognizable to moderate Democrats in Nebraska. Everything you just said is unrecognizable to independents in Michigan and Ohio. What you are...
What part?
I'm sorry?
What part of what I said is unrecognizable?
Oh, and by the way, me too.
The part where Democrats don't fight for them?
No, you're expecting a political... We only have 2 political parties. Now, that's a big problem. And you and I agree on that. I think we agree on that, right? We only have 2 political parties. So we're stuck with the Democrats. Like we're stuck. You and I can't solve that or change that. It should be solved and changed. You and I can't do it. So we're stuck with this political party that has to, by definition, represent a majority of America. If it doesn't represent a majority of America, we're going to lose. And Susan Estrich, listen to me. This is really important.
But the Democratic Party quite obviously doesn't represent a majority of America. And a majority of America wants universal health care. A majority of America wants a wealth tax. They spend their whole life representing the interests of their corporate donors. So the fundamental premise here is, I got to say, a little wacky to me.
You have no idea if Democrats in Alabama, Mississippi, and Nebraska want universal health care. You have no
I
idea.
do.
No, you might know if the political leaders in those states do, but you
No,
don't
these
know.
are not polls. I know that the political leaders in those states don't. I know that the people in those states do.
So let me finish. America is much more to the right than you want it to be.
It's not. It's on the right on whether trans kids can get services,
hold on.
but
Okay.
it's not to the right on whether healthcare should be a human right and whether the rich should be taxed more. And that's what we're talking about.
No, we're not. Now when we're talking about the Supreme Court. When we're talking about Biden and the Supreme Court, we're not talking about whether the rich can be taxed more and whether and there's.
But we are. We just talked about Chevron. We haven't even gotten to
the Supreme Court cannot create universal health care.
Well, that's not what I'm talking about. We just finished talking about Chevron, and it looks like we're not going to get.
Can I finish what I was going to say?
Sure, but the point of Chevron is that it's about it's the case that the billionaires hate because it's about regulatory power. So that's the bulk of what the Supreme Court is dealing with is restraints on financial regulations and the like, not cultural issues, gay marriage, etc. But go ahead.
You and I agree on a lot. We agree there should be healthcare. We agree there should be a huge tax above a certain level of wealth. I mean, I cannot believe we're having a conversation that we're not taxing, billionaire. I mean, it's crazy. We agree on a lot of policy issues. I think we agree on how bad the Supreme Court has been. And I think we agree that Joe Biden is a weak and ineffectual president. Okay. We agree on, now I think he's done some good things against great odds, but certainly going forward, he shouldn't be president. I mean, he should be compared to Trump, but he shouldn't be compared to anybody else. Okay. But what you did, I followed you for a while now because I really like you. I like your work, and you, with the exception of your views on Israel, which we're not going to discuss. And I have never made a public statement about Israel in my life. I'm not Jewish. I have a Jewish last name. I'm not Jewish. But let's take Israel out of the equation. I really, really like your views on America. I want so badly to get you to see, that sounds condescending, I don't mean it that way, that America is not what you think it is. Today, in America today, somewhere between 25 and 35% of the American people would go back to segregation, and I'm guessing 15 to 25% might go back to slavery. I am telling you that Nebraska and Oklahoma and Minnesota, rural parts, and of course there are big cities in all of these states, and that's different. But America is conservative and in some ways reactionary. So what the Democrats have to do, and this has been a problem in my study of history since the Progressive era, what Democrats have to do is figure out a way to get their policy goals, which are to the left of the median Democrat voter, not universal health care, that's an exception, but on almost everything else. Certainly on guns, like we are so far off on guns. Yes, Americans want reasonable gun control. The court is way off on guns too. But believe me, on guns, America is way to the right of you and me, and not just guns. So I don't know what the Democrats are supposed to do when you want them to represent a party and a country that, to my great sorrow, does not exist and has never existed. There was never a time when 50% of the American people were against the Vietnam War. There was never a time for that. Brown versus Board of Education was 1954. We're still living in a country with unconscionably segregated schools, and that's largely the result of choices made by racists in our country. So I don't know what to say to you. I don't know how to solve the Bernie Sanders Joe Biden problem. I don't know how to solve the problem that I prefer Bernie Sanders' policy solutions on every issue I can think of. He can never be president in this country. We proved that already. So I don't think it's fair to put all of this on Joe Biden's shoulders, and I don't think it's fair to put all of this
Professor Segall, a poll from June of 2023 showed that a majority of Americans support Supreme Court reforms, including term limits and ethics requirements, according to a UMass Amherst poll.
Sure.
It is also true. That is without any lobbying for it. That is without the President of the United States or any other really prominent Democrats coming forward and taking the case to the people. People intuitively, probably on the basis of reporting around Justice Thomas's corruption and the like, believe that some reforms need to happen. Moreover, you keep insisting, even by your own argument, you just said 15, 20% of people want to go back to slavery. Okay, that's not a populist majority. What we have a populist majority for, and what the Democrats, if they wanted to, could run on and have FDR levels of support, are policies like a wealth tax and like Medicare for all. So I really do resist the idea that it is progressives who are crazy for saying we should run on those things.
I didn't say progressives are crazy.
Okay, you're not saying it, but everybody else is.
I'm not.
That it's not Democrats who are crazy for saying we're going to run on incrementalism and saying I dissent in the face of an enormous, historically unprecedented power grab that, and we haven't even gotten to this case, that says the president of the United States is constructively immune from almost any criminal liability.
Well, that's disastrous. I guess that opinion was...
That's the conversation.
Well, but hold on. You're right. I mean, you asked me on to come talk about the Supreme Court, and I'm sorry we've gone far afield, but hold on a second. Through no fault of the... check that sentence. To have universal health care in this country, to have a wealth tax, to have all the things you and I desperately want. I mean, you and I agree on all the substantive things. We do. All of them, I think. You have to have a House of Representatives willing to pass those laws. And in a gerrymandered America, we can't get that. So we got to start right there. There's nothing Joe Biden can do about a gerrymandered America. There is nothing Chuck Schumer can do about a gerrymandered America.
But Eric, Chuck Schumer, we just saw New York State get chopped up and redistricted 15 ways that cost the Democrats the House, first of all, in midterms. And secondly, has resulted in the ousting of progressives like Jamal Bowman, all with barely a peep from the Chuck Schumers of the world and certainly nothing from the Joe Bidens of the world. To act like that is a kind of a Republican agenda that's outside of the Democratic Party that is doing the work to suppress its own progressive base, as I think missing the forest for the trees. That's precisely the problem. And I think without criticizing the Democrats there, we don't have a team to fight Republicans because the Democrats are too busy half the time fighting themselves, attacking their base, attacking the left.
Let's talk about my home state. So Georgia, Atlanta has always been, and I do know a lot about this. Atlanta didn't burn in the 60s. Every other major city in America burned. Every city in America burned, except Atlanta. So a close friend of mine wrote the best book on race and Atlanta that's ever been published, Where Peachtree Meets Sweet Auburn. It's an amazing book on race. Too long, but it's an amazing book. And he asked that question: why didn't Atlanta burn? Like Chicago burns, Dallas burns, Houston burns, San Francisco burns, New York burns. Why didn't Atlanta burn? And the answer is because Atlanta and Fulton County has a very strong Black middle class, and the white business establishment in Atlanta has made informal and formal deals with that Black middle class that has worked pretty much successfully for the city, not the state of Georgia, but the city of Atlanta. So I'm a progressive like you. I want all the things you want in the state of Georgia. But I can't get anything passed in the state of Georgia because the House of Representatives is the state house, not the federal house, is gerrymandered in a way that doesn't reflect the count of the majority of the people in Georgia. I can scream about that until I am hoarse, and I have. But there's nothing I can do about it. There's just nothing. All I can do is scream. What do you think we can do about Carl Rove's computer genius in the 1990s that gerrymandered the House in a way that even though the vast majority of Americans are Democrats, that even though we control more districts than Republicans and it's not close in terms of just if we did it fairly, Austin, Texas, I believe, is the biggest city in America without a representative. Why doesn't Austin, Texas have a representative in Congress? Because Karl Rove gerrymandered it out of existence. Now, we have a different podcast on what the Democrats could try to do about all that, but it's not easy, and it's not.
The question isn't whether it's easy, Eric. Like, I'm not arguing that it's easy.
Give me the answer to that. I'm listening.
The answer to the fundamental question of whether or not Joe Biden could have done something about court reform is yes, because I'm shocked about the resistance from you, frankly, Professor, because we sat here for an hour plus 2 years ago and came to that exact conclusion. Because he had the House, he had the Senate.
No, we didn't.
Yes, he did. 2 years ago, when we had the conversation. We did.
Go back.
We did have those things.
I said nothing was going to happen. I said nothing was going to happen.
No, of course nothing is going to happen because Joe Biden doesn't have the political will for it to happen. And
he doesn't have the power. He doesn't have the power.
Okay, so why don't we talk about how magically, please, let's go to the next subject then.
No,
How does
you didn't
Donald
you didn't
Trump?
answer my. Hold on, you didn't answer my.
Wait a minute. Donald Trump and the Republicans suddenly have all this power. So how about you help me understand how they have managed to have all of this power and Democrats don't have any? What is the answer to why we're sitting here looking at the Trump immunity case and tearing our hair out and freaking out about how this is the end of democracy because Republicans have all this power? Help me understand how Republicans got to there and Democrats seem to be standing around with, and yes, we can curse, their dicks in their hands.
I'd rather hear your. I'd rather hear your answer.
Well, no, I brought you on as a legal expert to help me understand how this immunity case got decided and what is the issue here.
I have been trying to explain it to you now for 30 minutes. There are, first of all, like most hard questions, and you're asking a great, hard, important question. There's no soundbite answer. I said that 30 minutes ago, and there's no one-line answer. There's no magic.
I don't expect there to be a soundbite or a one-line answer. So, but let's.
I'm going to answer your question. So it's a combination of a lot of different things, including, by the way, bad luck, right? Including bad luck. If Scalia dies a year earlier, we have a very different Supreme Court today. So that's what that. Now McConnell did heinous, terrible things, but he wouldn't have had the opportunity to do heinous, terrible things if Scalia died a year. So we can't. In every sporting event, in every political event, there's always some element of luck. You're not going to die. So that was bad luck. Now, what are the other factors at work? What I tried to say 30 minutes ago was there have not traditionally been enough politicians, public intellectuals, and law professors on the left who feel about the Supreme Court the way Nick Bowie and I feel about the Supreme Court. We're still exceptions. Now, it's getting much better. But Nick and I, along with Larry Kramer, former dean of Stanford, Mark Tushnet, your professor, and maybe two others, are the only public speaking people who do podcasts and essays and op-eds, and not law professors living in a library, who have believed consistently for 20 years that the Democrats have completely flubbed the federal judiciary, have completely flubbed the Supreme Court. They have been terrible at it. And the Supreme Court is an institution that shouldn't exist in the way it does. So there are like 6 law professors in America who feel that way. And I'm not sure there are any politicians. Let's take one of my favorite politicians, Jamie Raskin, who I think has done a really good job on things. And we're friends, so I'm not objective. I once sat in his office and taught his courses for a year. Jamie is in favor of court reform, but he's not in favor of the kind of major reforms you and I think that we need.
Why not?
Well, I'm not going to speak for Jamie because he grew up in a milieu of the Supreme Court, 20 years after the Warren Court, and this fantasy that if we just had different people, the country would be better. And he's wrong. I love Jamie. He's wrong on that point. Now, how does that tie into Kansas? It ties in directly to Kansas because you and I don't have to worry about Kansas. We really don't. I live in Atlanta. You live in a big city someplace, I'm sure. We don't have to deal with rural Oklahoma and rural Alabama. National politicians and national pundits, they do have to worry about that. So
Kansas, just to be clear, Kansas, where they just defeated an anti-abortion ballot.
Listen.
And Kansas, which has historically been a hotbed for American populism.
Don't you dare lecture me about abortion. 30 years ago, I said the overturning of Roe would be the best thing to happen to the left, of anything that could happen to the left, and it would be the best thing for abortion in the long run. The best thing for abortion in the long run was for Casey to overturn Roe. We wouldn't have the Supreme Court today if Casey had overturned Roe. Abortion is an exception to everything, and no one has staked out that position more than me. Mike Dorf, my good friend, co-blogger, Kennedy clerk, top 5 common law professors probably in America. Mike Dorf and I had a huge debate about this publicly where he disagreed and said, no, we can't. And I'm like, no, once Roe and Casey go away for good, eventually we'll get to a world like in Kansas where abortion rights are protected. So don't lecture me about abortion. But that's
it's certainly not a lecture, Eric, but it is an example of a state that I think it's.
So one out. It's the exception that proves the rule.
Well, no, because the second thing I said, we might have gotten lost in the fray, was Kansas, which has historically been a hotbed of American left populist movements for a generation ago, a generation or two ago.
That was 100 years ago.
I'm sorry, but this is what's ironic is that I feel like the left keeps getting told it doesn't understand the heartland. I'm sorry, one of my favorite left podcasters as a pair of guys from Kansas. What I think the liberals misunderstand is they frankly patronize people who are living all across the country in low income environments, both rural and urban. And so that because they're poor, they don't understand they have healthcare needs.
I never said that.
They don't understand. I'm not saying that you personally have said that, Eric, but this is the narrative that gets put. The implication is we have to move to some right to pick up people instead of moving to what they are saying that they want in terms of these left policies that are popular. There are left policies that are popular and left policies that are unpopular. There are right policies that are popular and right policies that are unpopular. And Democrats seem to be interested in, the same as Republicans, going for economic policies that are not popular. Both Republicans and Democrats do that. And to sheep herd their bases into thinking that it's a good idea, they divide the country up on cultural issues. So Democrats say we can't have Medicare for all because Republicans are racist. What does that have to do with anything? Republicans, 50% of Republicans support, 49% of Republicans support Medicare for all. 49% of Republicans. As
you know better than I do, we are the only Western country in the world that doesn't have a national maternity/paternity program. We are the only free country in the world that has no state nationally required childcare. You tell me why that's so.
I understand perfectly well, and I've had, as a guest on the show, Heather McGhee, and arguing about drain pool politics and the extent to which racism has historically been weaponized against working class interests to keep the country divided. But the irony is that it is the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, but I'm talking about Democrats right now because I think they have a responsibility to me. The Democratic Party that's doing that right now because they say a priori, because Republicans are going to weaponize race in this way, we can't fight for these things. Instead of considering maybe I should frame this differently. Police violence affects poor white people at very similar, if not the same rates as poor Black people. I think Roland Fryer did this research and got a lot of flack for it. Black people are disproportionately affected because we're disproportionately poor. But if you think that people don't care about Black people being disproportionately affected, stop making out the argument and just make the argument that we shouldn't live in a country where poor people are more likely to be gunned down by the police than rich people, and sell it to the American public. Make an argument that poor people shouldn't die from breast cancer and diabetes at higher rates than rich people, and sell that to the public. And stop. If you don't think it's effective because people are racist, then why on earth do you, as a Democrat, decide to frame every policy that you want to push in racial terms? You can't have it both ways. Might it be because you don't actually have a sincere interest in advancing some of these policies? And certainly policies that have nothing to do with race, like a wealth tax. Oh, except for the fact that, we are going to be taxing a lot of rich white people in the course of doing it, are completely off the table. We saw Nancy Pelosi refuse to bring a wealth tax, not a wealth tax to a vote, but the congressional insider trading ban to the floor in the first place, because it's all about protecting their power. Democrats can move mountains when it's about protecting their powers. Hey, YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.